I stood in white lace at the edge of the river, my hands trembling against the bouquet I could barely hold. My name is Lauren Mitchell, 28 years old, and this was supposed to be the day my family finally looked at me and saw more than the shadow of my younger sister. 2 seats had been reserved in the front row, tied with ribbons, their names written in steady ink, Richard and Carol Mitchell, my parents. They had promised nothing, but I had left space for them anyway, because a daughter should not have to imagine her own wedding without her parents sitting close enough to hear her vows. Yet the ribbons fluttered untouched, mocking me with their silence. The quartet played on. Guests shifted in their chairs, careful not to look too long at the gap. My friend Rachel Collins mouthed "breathe" from behind her camera. David Parker, steady as he had been since the first time he asked about my work instead of my grades, took my shaking hand and whispered the words I needed most. Here now. I tried to let those 2 words hold me, but my eyes kept sliding back to the empty chairs, to the space where love should have been. Later, while the music carried into the reception and friends lifted glasses for toasts, my phone lit up beside the bouquet. Against my better judgment, I looked. A video unfurled across the screen, turquoise water, palm trees bent in warm wind, laughter carried through speakers. My parents stood in the Florida Keys, drinks in hand, arms wrapped around Stephanie Mitchell, my younger sister, and her fiancé. Carol wore a lei of bright flowers. Richard raised a glass and shouted into the camera. To the future of our family, Stephanie leaned into the frame, smiling like a star under the setting sun. I felt the weight of eyes turning toward me. Rachel moved quickly, blocking the camera from catching my expression. David's jaw tightened, but his gaze stayed soft when it found mine. I pressed my palm flat against the linen of my dress until the tremor stilled. 2 chairs waited at the edge of the aisle, their ribbons fluttering without apology. I realized in that moment they hadn't forgotten they had chosen. I grew up in Toledo, in a neighborhood where appearances mattered more than honesty, where lawns were trimmed sharp as photographs, and where my parents, Richard and Carol, believed the world saw them through whatever story they could paste to the front of the house. Inside, the wall of our living room was arranged like a shrine to achievement, though it was never mine. Plaques, medals, polished trophies, all of them belonged to Stephanie, my younger sister. She was the daughter they called promising, the girl who looked right in photographs and said the kinds of words adults loved to hear. When I was 10, I carried home a certificate from an art contest, edges bent from the bus ride. I thought maybe this would change the pattern. Maybe Richard would pause. Maybe Carol would smile in a way that reached her eyes. "That's nice," Carol said, already reaching for a new debate medal of Stephanie's to hang on the wall. My certificate curled at the corner of the fridge until it slid down behind a stack of coupons. At 14, I stood in a community center under buzzing fluorescent lights, my drawings pinned to corkboard. It was my first gallery, if you could call it that. Other parents crowded around their children's work, proud voices filling the hall. My corner stayed quiet, my sketches breathing into the air without witness. I smiled until my jaw ached, carrying posters home in the rain when it ended. No one asked how it went. Those early years taught me to clap for myself in silence. Every birthday card Richard signed with Stephanie's accomplishments written between the lines. Every holiday photo mailed out to neighbors placed her in the center. While I lingered blurred at the edge, I learned the sound of praise given to one child and withheld from another. I thought if I worked harder, louder, brighter, they would notice. But invisibility had already shaped itself around me. A second skin I could not peel away. Dinner at our house was often held with the phone pressed to speaker. Richard and Carol nodding as Stephanie's voice filled the room from whatever pre-law program she was attending that semester. Her stories stretched long debate victories, internships, professors who praised her clarity. My plate cooled while I rehearsed the small news I wanted to share. When I tried, the rhythm broke. "That's great," Richard would interrupt. "But did you hear what Stephanie did last week? My words slid off the table like crumbs no one bothered to sweep. By 16. I knew the script. Stephanie's future was the family's anthem, played over and over, while mine barely registered as background noise. Report cards, part-time jobs, sketches I stayed up past midnight finishing, none of it found a listening ear. Carol adjusted picture frames when I spoke, nodding without absorbing a syllable. The message was clear, her voice carried weight. Mine floated unnoticed. I learned to fold silence around me like a coat. At the dinner table, I listened until my ribs felt caged. When laughter rose at her anecdotes, I added a smile. Even when it hurt, I practiced speaking less, saving words for my sketchbook instead. By then, I had stopped expecting recognition, though a part of me still ached every time Richard's eyes lit for her and dulled for me. The house echoed with a single note, one name repeated until it erased the others. I walked upstairs to my room each night, invisible in my own home, wondering if there would ever be a space where my voice wouldn't be swallowed whole. When I left Toledo for college, I carried more than a suitcase. I carried the certainty that if I wanted a future, I would have to build it myself. A scholarship covered part of the tuition, but the rest came from side jobs, late shifts at the campus cafe, hours tutoring freshmen in design basics, long nights sketching logos for local businesses that paid just enough to keep me moving forward. I learned to stretch meals into 2 days, to wash clothes in quick cycles at midnight, to treat exhaustion as a normal part of being alive. I sent emails home, hoping for connection. I wrote about my first design internship, about the nights I spent learning software shortcuts, about the small thrill of seeing my work in a student showcase. Replies came, but they never lingered on me. "How's Stephanie's firm doing?" Carol asked in one line, ignoring everything I had shared. Richard's answer was shorter. "Stephanie just got another award." My words felt like letters dropped into a well, swallowed before they reached anyone. In that silence, other voices filled the gaps. Rachel Collins, the friend who had pushed me into my first student show, reminded me to stop hiding the best of my work. David Parker, who sat across from me in design labs, asked real questions about process instead of outcomes. "Show me your thinking," he would say, leaning closer. For the first time, someone wanted to see the path, not just the result. Their encouragement became a thread I could follow through the noise of comparison. I began to stitch worth together from overlooked moments, a professor's nod, a freelance client's second call, the simple relief of making rent on my own. Each step carried me farther from the silence I had grown up with, though part of me still looked back, wondering if Richard and Carol would ever notice the distance. My first agency badge felt heavier than it should have, a small piece of plastic that carried every sleepless night, every sketch drawn between classes, every choice I had made alone. The office smelled of fresh print and burnt coffee, and for once I belonged to a place that measured me by work delivered, not by comparison. I built style guides, drafted campaigns, and learned the rhythm of deadlines that cut close but left me stronger each time. When a local trade blog printed my name beneath an article praising a regional rebrand, I stared at the headline until the screen blurred. It felt like proof, a quiet declaration that my path mattered. I sent the link home. Hours passed before a reply came. "Stephanie just made moot court champion." Richard wrote, as if her accomplishment canceled mine. Carol added a single question. "Are you networking like Stephanie?" My chest hollowed, the article still glowing while their words dimmed it. So I learned to applaud myself. At midnight, standing in the small kitchen of my apartment, I whispered "good job" to the hum of the refrigerator. Rachel clapped loud enough for both of us, her camera always ready to capture the pieces I tried to downplay. David poured tea and asked sharper questions than any manager, seeing details others missed, their support stitched over the silence, though the wound never fully closed. By then, I had stopped waiting for Richard and Carol's approval. The applause they gave belonged to another stage, another daughter. I carried my victories quietly, marking progress not in their recognition, but in the steady climb of my own making. David proposed on a quiet evening at the edge of the river, the patio light swaying gently above us. He slid a small box across the table. Though I had already said yes before the lid opened, his eyes told me what I had longed to hear since childhood. I see you, clearly, as you are. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe in a future not measured against my sister's name. We chose a simple riverside wedding, small enough to feel honest, steady enough to feel like ours. I designed the invitations myself, layering soft inked ripples across cream paper, each one mailed with trembling fingers. 3 went into the envelope marked for Richard and Carol, because hope, no matter how battered, still flickered. I wanted them there. I wanted to believe that on this day, they might finally show up for me. Rachel teased me for double-checking the guest list, but she knew better than to joke too far. She had seen the ache that trailed me through every milestone. David, steady as ever, held my doubts without trying to erase them. If they come, we welcome them, he said. If they don't, we still have us. I nodded, but deep down I left 2 chairs waiting, ribbons tied carefully, as if presents could be invited by space alone. The morning of my wedding glowed with a gentle haze, the river catching sunlight like scattered glass. Guests began to arrive, their shoes pressing softly into the grass, laughter and whispers filling the air. 2 chairs at the front row, tied with white ribbons, remained untouched. I told myself not to look at them, but my eyes found them again and again, each glance slicing deeper. When the quartet began to play, I stepped forward, the hem of my dress brushing against the stones. Rachel Collins lifted her camera, mouthing "breathe." While David Parker stood waiting with a steadiness that held me together, I repeated the vows, voice trembling, hands unsteady, until his eyes steadied me again. The guests clapped, some with damp cheeks, but behind the applause was a silence that would not leave the silence of 2 empty chairs. The reception unfolded with soft music and the hum of conversation. David's parents raised glasses, friends danced, and for a brief moment I let myself lean into the celebration. Then my phone lit up beside the bouquet, a glowing screen I should have ignored, a single video stretched across it turquoise water, palms swaying, sunlight caught in ripples. My parents, Richard and Carol Mitchell, stood beaming in the Florida Keys, arms wrapped tight around Stephanie, her engagement ring glittering against the sunset. Richard lifted his glass high. To the future of our family. The caption beneath read, "Celebrating our star daughter." The music of my reception blurred into noise. My chest burned while my face practiced stillness. Guests glanced at me, then at the phone, whispers rippling like wind through the crowd. Rachel moved quickly, her body a shield between me and curious eyes. David's jaw clenched, but when he looked at me, his gaze was soft. "Here now," he whispered, reminding me of where I stood. I slipped the phone into my pocket, pressing my palm flat against the table until the tremor in my hand stilled. The chairs remained empty, ribbons swaying as if mocking. In that moment I understood fully they hadn't forgotten, they hadn't been delayed, they had chosen. 3 days after the wedding, while dishes dried on the counter and the quiet of ordinary life settled in, the phone rang. The caller ID glowed Richard Mitchell. Against my better judgment, I answered. His voice was clipped, practiced, as though he had rehearsed. "Lauren, about that $20,000 loan from your undergrad years, we need you to help cover Stephanie's wedding expenses." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. What loan, I asked, keeping my voice even. Richard cleared his throat. "The one we helped with. It's only fair you contribute now. Families help families." In the background, I caught Carol's sharper tone. Faint but deliberate. "Don't be dramatic." "This is what family does." My grip tightened around the phone. but the glass in my other hand didn't break. I hung up, walked to my desk, and opened the folders I had avoided since graduation. Statements, confirmations, every payment accounted for. Each month had been paid by me alone, late nights at the cafe, design gigs squeezed between classes, the exhaustion of carrying it without help. Still, I called the bank because facts mattered. A representative pulled up the records and walked me through the years. All clear, she said. Loan satisfied. No third-party payers on file. Relief and fury tangled inside me. I dialed Richard back. The documents open in front of me. My loans are paid by me. No balance, no you. Silence stretched. Then he coughed. Families help families, he repeated. Weaker, now. Carol's voice cut through again. Be reasonable. Lauren, my jaw set. They had not only abandoned me on my wedding day, they had tried to rewrite my history to steal from me. The weight of that realization pressed like stone, and a colder part of me began to form words I had never dared speak aloud. Sunday came with the kind of air that carried whispers through neighborhoods, and my aunt insisted on hosting dinner. I knew Richard and Carol would be there, and I carried my folder of documents like armor. When I walked in, relatives filled the room with chatter, plates clinking, chairs shifting. At the far end of the table, my parents sat straight-backed, Stephanie glowing beside them, her fiancé speaking politely to cousins who only half listened. I waited until the main course was cleared before placing the papers on the table. About that college loan, I began, my voice steady, forks stilled, the hum of conversation cut short. I laid out bank records, payment histories, confirmation emails, each page proof that every cent had been mine. This is the truth. You didn't pay $1. Richard's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the papers without focus. We invested in you emotionally, he tried, tone wrapped in authority. Carol leaned forward, her voice sharp as glass. You've always been ungrateful. Families don't keep score. I looked directly at them, no longer shrinking into silence. Family shows up. You didn't. You skipped my wedding for the Florida Keys, and now you invent debts that don't exist. You called my vows trivial. Remember, you can't rewrite my history to suit your comfort. The room shifted. Aunts exchanged glances, cousins whispered. Even Stephanie's fiancé frowned, his hand stilling on her arm. Stephanie flushed, lips parting as though to speak, but no words came. The weight of truth hung heavier than any accusation. Richard opened his mouth again, but no argument arrived. The silence spread like wildfire, settling over the table, leaving only the rustle of papers as I gathered them back. I didn't shout, didn't break. I simply left the truth there, undeniable, and met their gaze one last time. The mask slipped from their faces, and for once, the story they had built for decades cracked in front of witnesses. They had always thrived on image, but image couldn't hold against evidence laid bare. I sat back in my chair, calm, cold, certain. A daughter no longer pleading, only stating what had always been true. That night, back in the quiet of my own kitchen, I opened my laptop and set the folder of papers aside. Proof was no longer for them, it was for me. What I needed now was a line they could not cross. I began typing, each word steady, as if laying bricks one after another. To Richard, Carol, and Stephanie, I wrote, Your actions have clarified my place. You dismissed my wedding, celebrated hers publicly, and attempted to revise my finances. I do not consent to revision or debt. Do not contact me about money again. Do not contact me about trivial matters either. Future attempts will be ignored. I choose my peace and my home. I read it once, aloud, the sound echoing against the tile. David Parker stood beside me, sliding a pen across the table as though sealing the act. Write it like you mean it, he said quietly, his voice steady as vows. I counted my breaths, inhale, exhale until the tremor left my hands. Then I pressed send. Afterward, I blocked their numbers, one by one, watching the screen fall silent. No apology came, no sudden call of regret, only quiet. But it was a quiet I had chosen. For the first time in my life, silence felt less like erasure and more like air. The email went out, and for a moment, quiet followed. It wasn't peace yet, just room for it. News traveled without my hand guiding it. Mary, my cousin who had always hosted summer cookouts, stopped inviting Richard and Carol. Group threads fell silent when their names appeared. Aunts who once praised them for raising such successful daughters now asked careful questions. Their voices dipped with doubt. At a neighborhood gathering, I heard Richard attempt his old script. It was a misunderstanding. He told a cluster of men around the grill. His smile stretched thin, but no one laughed. No one nodded. One of them asked plainly, "Then, why weren't you at Lauren's wedding?" The pause that followed spoke louder than any excuse. Even Stephanie could not escape the shadow of what they had done. At her engagement dinner, seated beside her fiancé, she flushed when his parents leaned forward. "We heard about Florida Keys," his mother said, unblinking. "Fairness matters in a family." The air shifted, heavy and sharp. Stephanie looked down, her fork untouched, then whispered, almost too low to hear, "I never asked them to." It wasn't a defense, not really, more a confession of unease. I did not gloat. I did not need to. Consequences came without my effort, carried by the truth I had laid bare. I planted quiet instead, brick by careful brick. Each day felt steadier, mornings with tea, evenings with walks, silence no longer punishment but choice. Their empire of image was crumbling, and I no longer lived beneath it. I turned my focus to the life I was building, not the one I had left behind. Work filled my days with deadlines and drafts, but instead of feeling heavy, it felt like ground I could stand on. Clients returned because they trusted my voice, not because I fought for scraps of recognition. Each project became another stone in a foundation no one else could take credit for. At home, the circle around me grew steadier. David Parker carried the ordinary miracles brewing tea when nights stretched too long, holding my hand through decisions that once would have left me paralyzed. Rachel Collins arrived often with laughter too loud for the walls, her camera straps clinking as she reminded me not to shrink my story. Friends like George and Diane, neighbors who asked nothing but truth, filled our evenings with dinners that tasted of acceptance. Then came a day when the world tilted for good. I held my daughter for the first time, Emma, small and fierce, her cry cutting through every shadow I had ever carried. In her face I saw no comparison, no conditions, only presence. Something fundamental settled in me. Family was no longer an inheritance I had to beg for. It was a verb I practiced daily, in patience, in care, in love freely given and returned. I framed our wedding photo above my desk, not to forget the empty chairs, but to remember what I chose instead. The silence of their absence had become the soil where something new could grow. Something mine. I keep a garden now, small but steady, each row marked by care rather than performance. Sometimes, while watering in the evening light, I remember the 2 empty chairs and the phone glowing with a sunset from the Florida Keys. Those memories arrive uninvited, but they do not linger. They sit on the edge of my mind, then leave, because I no longer open the gate. Forgiveness, I have learned, does not mean access. History remains recorded, but the future belongs here in the laughter of Emma, in dinners with David, in Rachel's relentless joy. Family is a verb I choose, not a title handed down. If Richard and Carol ever knock, they will find the path unchanged. The garden stays locked, the gate closed, my peace unbroken.